Israel says limited war gains could see northern Israelis return home soon. After a long campaign in Gaza against Hamas, the Israeli military has begun limited operations in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah and says it is prioritizing the return of civilians to northern Israel. Having started its long-planned offensive against Hezbollah on the night of September 30th, the IDF is seeking to dismantle the Iran-backed terror group's capabilities and infrastructure that pose a threat to Israeli civilian communities in northern Israel. Israel's leaders recently added to their list of goals for the war the safe return of the tens of thousands of Israelis who had to evacuate the north after Hezbollah began their near-daily rocket attacks on October 8 last year. Israel's war against the Hamas terrorist group, and now Hezbollah, was in response to the former's invasion of southern Israel on October 7, 2023, in which more than 1,200 Israelis were massacred, thousands more injured, and 250 taken hostage. After the entry of Israeli ground forces was announced on September 30, it wasn't even clear where IDF troops had entered Lebanon. Early the next day, Lebanese troops and UNIFIL peacekeepers stationed in the area did not confirm the IDF's entry, although UNIFIL said it had been notified of the offensive. The ground war then heated up as Israel reported its first fatality of the offensive, Captain Eitan Itzhak Oster, a 22-year-old commando, and those of 7 more soldiers, in 2 separate fights with Hezbollah fighters. In one, IDF commandos were reportedly ambushed near Hezbollah tunnels in Odessa, a Lebanese village that sits on the Israeli border. Late on October 2nd, as the Jewish New Year began in Israel, it was still unclear how deep into Lebanon the Israeli ground forces had pushed. How far do they need to go? Pushing Hezbollah a few miles back from the frontier could make a big difference for Israelis. Hezbollah had joined in attacks on Israel after Hamas's devastating October 7th attack. Suspecting that Hezbollah had planned a similar attack from the north, Israel evacuated 43 communities with about 60,000 residents within 5 kilometers of its northern border. Thousands more who lived further from the border evacuated as well, fearful of longer-range rockets. A year later, they have not been able to return home. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, under pressure to show some progress, added the return home of Israel's northern residents to the country's former war goals and now mentions it in his public statements as often as he does the return of the remaining hostages from Gaza. One factor in delineating the evacuation zone is the anti-tank weapons that Hezbollah fires at structures, including homes, Sarit Zahavi, an Israeli intelligence analyst specializing in the northern frontier, told the Epoch Times. Unlike missiles fired in a ballistic arc, which allow time for air raid sirens to warn Israeli residents to seek cover, anti-tank weapons fly in a flat line. They can strike within seconds, with no time to warn civilians, Zahavi said. They can also strike targets up to 5 kilometers away. Zahavi said clearing a border zone of that depth would be a doable objective, one that would allow Israeli evacuees to return home. It would also allow Netanyahu to show progress toward that goal as the first anniversary of October 7th approaches. Clearing the zone, she said, was possible now in combination with the IDF's other recent achievements, including its successful targeting of Hezbollah's leaders and destruction of so much of its weapons stockpile. Longtime Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah was killed on September 27 in an air attack on an underground bunker as he met there with top staff. She hedged away from saying that the IDF needed to push exactly 5 kilometers into Lebanon. The terrain is not flat, and I don't know what the IDF planned. We should look at the principal clearing of the areas next to the border from any Hezbollah activity that can threaten our civilians living next to the border, she said. Anti-tank missiles are part of that, but also, it is important to make sure that if terrorists are coming next to the fence, we will be able to see them before they infiltrate and massacre our families. The IDF and national leadership have repeatedly used the word limited to describe the latest phase of its war with Hezbollah, codenamed Operation Northern Arrows. IDF troops have begun limited, localized, and targeted raids against Hezbollah terror targets in the border area of southern Lebanon, the IDF wrote on September 30th. The Israel Defense Forces is conducting limited and targeted raids along Israel's northern border against the threat Hezbollah poses to civilians in northern Israel, the IDF wrote on October 1st. These targets are located in villages close to the border and pose an immediate threat to Israeli communities in northern Israel. Posting about the 98th Division, which includes elite paratroopers and commandos that have figured prominently in the Gaza fighting over the past year, the IDF also posted on October 1st that its soldiers have been preparing for limited, localized, targeted operations in southern Lebanon that began last night, Monday. The IDF noted their repositioning to the north from the battlefield Gaza. They moved north and are now operating in the northern arena after making the necessary adjustments for fighting in Lebanon.